the topics and also to the other guests.
Okay, you were not letting me open my microphone, Leonardo, so I was worried I couldn't talk. Okay, now thank you very much. I'm very pleased and very honored to be here, and thank you for this fantastic initiative, for this great journal that you have concocted, and I'm really very proud. We are all very proud of you. Thank you very much. Now, of course, this is our talk, our informally informed talk of today is about one of my favorite topics, that is especially audiovisual representation, but in general, the fictional representation of characters, stories that, as we know, have an enormous influence on the lives of all of us. There is no comparison with the influence that the representation on screen, on any screen, I would say, has on our minds, our daily lives, our way of speaking, our way of relating to each other. Not even reality has the power of fiction. This is my great conviction, not even reality. So it is very important for us all, I think, to be able to understand how to analyze this, at least some of these representation. Today, in particular, we are focusing on language varieties, but in general, the representation in general, the way that we convey reality through the screen and through fictional characterizations and dialogue in general is particularly relevant to all of us. There is one thing that I would say that it is very, very important to always research on stereotypes. There is a great talk on stereotypes on screen and in literature and in fictional representation in general. But I must say that stereotypes are well researched, are being well researched. There is no lack, as all of you who study this kind of things know very well. There is no lack of research on this topic in particular, the topic of stereotypes. Funnily enough, paradoxically, there is not much research on types. So stereotype is one thing, type is a more general concept, and I would say that this is a topic which is very much under-researched. Stereotypes obviously have a negative aura about them. Types can be nice types, any type. In literature, they're called, and also in audiovisuals, they're called sometimes stock characters, no? Tipi fissi, no? Types which are fixed in representations. And let me tell you again that these are not well researched. Also in film studies, in television studies, you don't have much on all these. I recently wrote, for example, an article on the butler, il maggiordomo, la figura del maggiordomo, as it is represented in films and TV series. Well, all these, the detective, the prostitute, etc., all the types which are so recurrent in all the stories that we read and watch, are really much underrepresented. So that's what I wanted to say, to give you maybe inspiration for future research. Now, I would like to introduce our special guests here, very good friends, Michela Piccione, Luca Valleriani and Gaia Ramazzotti. They've all been my students, and again, I'm very proud to say they've been my students. They wrote some wonderful theses. Michela wrote an unforgettable thesis on the representation of African American in literature and audiovisuals. Gaia Ramazzotti on Romani characters, and this is what also an original, quite original perspective on the other, on the way we see the other on screen. So not only the Romani character, in that case it was the Romani character, the Rom, but in general it was a view on the other. And of course, Luca is now an old friend, we can say. He wrote 2 theses with me, and he has specialized on language varieties, at the moment on the variety, on the social variety of upper class English. And I must say that, of course, most of you know that I'm interested in upper class English, but I must say that Luca has taken an in-depth look at the phonological traits. He is much better than me in this, that he looks at the representation, at the linguistic representation, probably more interested in the linguistic representation than in the translation of this variety. And of course, again, I'm using this word proud far too many times, but it is really the word now. So I must say that, as I told Leonardo, the scaletta confuses me a little.
From here, I can just remind everybody in the audience that we will have 2 Q&A during this event, and there is the possibility on Zoom to raise your hand. So during that particular times, that will be after this first part that will start right now, and then at the end of the event, you can raise your hand through the option on Zoom. I will activate your mic and ask any question or make any comment you would like. But for now, I would like to start with Michela, since Michela has been one of the authors during for the first issue of Transitions, and you published an article that was titled "The Importance of Code Switching: A Bibliographic Essay on African American Vernacular English in Courtrooms." And I really would like to ask you if you could tell us something about your research interests and about the essay.
Yes, of course. Hello, everybody, and thank you for inviting me and for this great presentation. Now I'm feeling a little bit nostalgic of the university years. And yes, I wrote an article for Transition about code switching from African American English to Standard American English in a legal context. And this idea came up several months before when I was writing my MA thesis about the audiovisual representation of Black English. And when I was doing some research about How to Get Away with Murder, so a TV series that talks about attorneys, trials, I found some articles and some research about the consequences of using Black English in the legal context. And I have to admit that I was surprised because, well, it wasn't a surprise to me that Black English speakers and in general the African American community suffers innumerable forms of stigmatization. But I didn't know that there were so many negative consequences of employing this linguistic variety during trials. So when I read the main theme of your first issue, I thought that this was the perfect occasion to talk about it. But before diving into the topic, I would like to make a really brief introduction about what African American English is. And it is a linguistic variety distinguished from standard American English on the phonological, lexical, syntactic level. And because of that, it is stigmatized as a form of broken English, spoken by ignorant people who aren't able to code switch to the standard form. However, there are many important studies that prove that Black English is a structured and rule-governed language. However, being able to code switch is fundamental in some contexts, but also to be accepted by the mainstream society and to be able to access better jobs. But this can create also an identity issue, because on one hand, Black English speakers know that if they want to feel integrated within the American society, they have to record to the standard form. But they also know that even by doing that, they won't be completely accepted by them because of discrimination. But on the other hand, if they transition, we could say, toward this new culture, new linguistic system, they may feel detached from their own community. But they also can be criticized for acting white by their own community. And in an interview, I discovered this term that is the Oreo, and it is not the biscuit you all know, but it refers to the fact that they feel Black on the outside, but white on the inside. So they experience this in-betweenness between two worlds, two cultures, what is known as double consciousness. However, in my article, I mentioned some trials, some cases in the legal context that prove that being able to code switch can be fundamental. And there is an important study led in 2019 that states that court reporters have to be certified at least 95% of accuracy in their transcriptions. However, in the case of Black English, they do not always reach this level of accuracy. And of course, if they misinterpret Black English utterances, there could be some negative outcomes during the trial. And I made some examples, but I think that the most outstanding one concerns George Zimmerman. He fatally shot the 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, an African-American teenager whose only fault was to walk in a rich neighborhood wearing a hood. But during the attack, he was on the phone with his friend, Rachel Gentle, and therefore she became the main witness during the trial. However, her 6 hours testimony was not taken into consideration because it was reputed incomprehensible and not credible. So, but not only she was discredited in court, she was also insulted on social medias, and I'm quoting, obnoxious, uneducated, disrespectful, dishonest, ignorant waste of space. She's given a pass on all this because she's Black. This lady is a perfect example of uneducated urban ignorance. However, for example, there are 2 important linguists in this field, Rickford and King, and they studied this trial, and they proved that she was using a rule-governed linguistic variety. However, in standard English, structures such as double negation or the use of ain't, the omission of third singular person s are considered mistakes. So I think that nowadays, for this speech community, it has become, code-switching has become more a requirement than a free choice.
This is extremely interesting. I was thinking about what Professor Ranzato was saying about the stigma, the stereotypes that go along with the use of particular varieties of English, and you mentioned code switching. Because as you said, the ability to switch between varieties of language are extremely important socially. And there is another phenomenon, style shifting. How different it is from the term code switching?
Well, I think that the difference is very, very light in this case, because when I studied this linguistic variety, I found many articles and many essays. Some of them referred to this phenomenon as code switching, others as style shifting, but it depends on how we perceive this linguistic variety. If we perceive it as a language, just a dialect, or there is on a continuum, there is so many nuances. So and as you mentioned, the stereotype, there is also the stereotype that just because a person has African American origins, he or she will necessarily use Black English. However, there are innumerable persons of color who express themselves only in standard English, whereas there are other people who cannot code switch because they didn't have the opportunity to learn the standard language, for example. And we could talk about this for so long, about education, etc. But yes, the difference in this case, it's not so big.
So distinct. I mean, it's not so direct to identify. Thank you.
Depends on the point of view.
Okay. That's extremely interesting, and to see how the perception, the social perception of varieties change. And well, to the next guest, to Luca Valleriani, I would like just to mention that the first match during a conference I was helping during, if I'm not wrong, was them and us, the conference on dialects and the perception of them. And there you presented a study on English accents and stereotypes. Could you give us some insight into that, and also into your doctoral research? Oh, sorry, always forget that.
Yes. Well, first of all, good evening to everyone, and let me thank you, Leonardo, for organizing this, and thank you to the whole group of Transitions for thinking about me and inviting me today. So yes, as Leonardo was mentioning, we met back in February 2019 for this conference, focused on the use of dialects and accents of English in the fictional dialogue, in general, organized by Professor Ranzato and Professor Montini. At that time, I gave a talk on, I presented a study where I showed the the linguistic landscape of this animated film, of this Disney animated film, Zootopia, where we can find many accents, many dialects, in particular American accents, but also foreign accents that are used to say something socioculturally speaking about characters, and let's say that they rely on pre-existing stereotypes that are very deeply rooted in American culture. For example, and here I link to what Michela was saying. There is in the movie a character who speaks African American vernacular, and this character is a thief, a smuggler. Or, for example, there is another character who is a boss, a mobster, who speaks an Italian accented English. So I gave a list of all these characters in the original version, and then I focused on the Italian translation, the Italian dubbed version. Generally, it is rare to find diatopic varieties in the translated version, but these sometimes we can find them, especially with animation, and this is one of the cases. The dubbing team, the Italian dubbing team of Zootopia, opted for a strategy that that could create a similar effect that we have while watching the original version. In particular, they used some Italian accents to characterize some types, and the use of the selection of these accents relies again on stereotypes that are rooted this time on Italian culture. So, for example, that thief character who had the African vernacular the African American vernacular in the original version speaks with a Neapolitan accent in Italian, or the little mobster who speaks a Sicilian accent. So we can say that if on one hand this strategy was successful because it elicited humor and created a similar varied linguistic situation. But on the other end, I found paradoxical that I don't know if you watched the movie, in a film that it is supposed to teach to children, to the audience in general, that we should not judge people by their look, by their origins. Then we find stereotyped language. I mean a kind of language that enhances stereotypes.
It's interesting how these there is in this film in Zootopia there is this let's say lack of attention to these linguistic nuances. So trying to be a vehicle of non-discrimination and at the same time using stereotypes in language. But on the other hand, what I wanted also to say is that while here we have dialect varieties of, let's say, regional varieties of language, such as those that you have described in Zootopia, you, as Professor Ranzato mentioned, you are also very interested in those that are called the sociolects, the social varieties. Could you clarify, let's say, the difference?
Yeah, sure. So as Professor Ranzato was mentioning, my doctoral research is focused on upper class English, on the language of the British upper classes, which we can define as a sociolect. A sociolect is different from a dialect meaning that while dialects are linguistic variation related to the geographical origin of the speaker, sociolects are related to their social background, their sociocultural background. So for example, the language of a social class can be defined as a sociolect, but any other language specific of any kind of social group. And yeah, so my thesis, which is about to be completed, is a description of upper class English. And its main aim is that of reorganizing the very little, sparse, and in some ways also outmoded information about upper class English. So let's say I tried to give an original insight on the evolution of this sociolect, on the present situation, the linguistic facts, especially from the phonological point of view, and how it is represented in the audiovisual dialogue. And in particular, in order to offer some new and original data about it, I analyzed and compared the language of some members of the royal family and how their idiolects is represented in Netflix TV series The Crown.
Thank you very much for these descriptions of your doctoral thesis, which I find extremely interesting. I'm also really a fan of, trying to catch those nuances while watching this series and movies. And on this particular matter, I would like to ask Gaia something, because Gaia, you obviously you share the interest in these topics. Otherwise, let's say I wouldn't know what are you doing there among all the people. No, just joking. But you graduated in English and Anglo-American Studies with an MA thesis, as Professor Ranzato was saying before, on the Romani language or Romani representation in series, which I believe was Social and Ethnic Otherness, the title of your thesis, the linguistic representation of Romani characters on screen. And what is this otherness?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Leonardo, for this question. The concept of otherness was something I started having in mind while doing research for my thesis, because something that I found while reading papers on media representations of Romani characters was the constant mentioning of processes of othering, meaning that representations on screen of this controversial minority is very often, it's not to say almost every time, based on the binary speech with them, or majority minority, or settled society versus nomadic communities. So I wanted to retrace possible patterns of othering that I already found in news covering and in mainstream media in audiovisual products. So while analyzing dialogues from Peaky Blinders and Suburra Blood on Rome, so the series, not the film, I found out that script writers somehow took advantage of reiterated images which are already present in the imagination of the audience and which are built through news covering and media coverage. And they had the ability to use language to exploit these images to convey, let's say, a sharp image of some characters. But they did this in such diverse ways, because actually in Peaky Blinders, we can observe Thomas Shelby, the main character of the series, which is a decoy, meaning that he's a half-blood Romanical. He shows some degree of linguistic awareness, let's say social linguistic awareness, because he is able to take advantage of his origin and of his ability to code switch from standard English to Romani language to make alliances. So for his own advantage, meaning that he is aware that code switching and the use of a certain variety can create a sense of solidarity among a minority, which is something that Michela already mentioned, in order to be recognized as part of that minority and find an ally against the other, that in this case is the majority. On the contrary, the character of Spadino in Suburra is trying to establish a distance between his family, his very violent and patriarchal brother, and his own experience by resisting accommodation. So he's constantly refusing code switching throughout the series. Is a tool that script writers use to create solidarity between the audience and Spadino. So I try to highlight how this linguistic awareness shared by script writers, fictional characters, and the audience can work together to ensure that certain messages can be brought over without even making them explicit. So I found studies on language attitudes super helpful in this, because stereotyping and speech evaluation is something that is quite researched recently. So linguistic psychologists are now able to actually predict what reaction speakers have when listening to specific language varieties. So I try to put together all these elements, so processes of othering already present in news covering, and findings in language attitude studies, and to apply them to the linguistic representation of fictional characters belonging to contractual minority like Romanis on screen.
And you spoke about Peaky Blinders and Suburra, the series, not the film, which are kind of recent audiovisual products. So do you think there is a linguistic attention that is becoming more evident?
This is a complex question. I would say that I think script writers are aware of how powerful linguistic depiction can be in audiovisual products, because it is immediate, and then the reaction in the audience is almost unconscious. Stereotype studies says that there is probably cognitive structures that work immediately, creating a response, a stereotypical response when they see a stimuli. So I think script writers are very aware of this, and so they try to exploit the resources of language to create also nuanced, realistic characters, but also to convey ideological meanings. While at the same time, I think that especially in the case of minorities, representation is, let's say, not always truthful, and Peaky Blinders was an example of that, because in the first 2 seasons of the series, they actually got the language wrong. So when in the instances of code switching between Romani characters, they were actually speaking Romanian, which is a totally different language, has nothing to do with Romanese, and luckily we live in a time where audiences have the power to speak up. So viewers complained a lot about this. Both Romani and non-Romani viewers were really shocked about that in late 2010s there is already such mistakes in such big productions, because it is a BBC production. So and so they actually got it right starting from the first series. They have now a linguistic supervisor that checks that everything in order, everything is correct, because that was really, let's say, they experienced some backlash from that, because audience was shocked to find out that was actually Romanian and had nothing to do with Romani characters at all. So I think, yeah, probably there is growing awareness on how linguistic depiction can be used to create very interesting characters, to create also more nuanced speech communities in TV series. But at the same time, I think there is still a lot to do in this sense.
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere that also the Brumi accent had something wrong in the first series, that it wasn't on spot, and that just from, I think, the second season, actually they had much improvement in that case. And I remember the trauma watching the first episodes of Peaky Blinders, thinking, well, after all these years studying English, I will be able to understand them. And
the Birmingham accent,
was extremely wrong. But in this last few years, obviously, there are many contents that have been released that in which accents and dialects play a big role. I was thinking also to Game of Thrones, for example, so Doctor Who. And I wanted to ask Professor Ranzato, actually, it is not only a recent phenomenon, this attention to dialect. There is the realistic representation of dialects has been something going on even in the past.
Well, yes. Well, first of all, each culture, obviously, each speech community, I would say, has its own relationship with standardness and non-standardness. And I can relate only to the Italian tradition and of course the British one. Especially, I would say, especially the British one, because I've studied British cinema more than Italian cinema. But for example, British cinema always had, let's say, a tendency to portray regional dialects and social dialects on screen. There is a long-standing tradition of emphasizing accents, speech patterns, as a way of making a comment on class differences, regional differences, back from the 1930s. That there were the GPO documentaries. The GPO was a unit of the post office, of the General Post Office, and they had this film unit which produced documentaries, and their regional accents and social accents had much relevance, and they were very popular. Everybody watched them, and so in a way, yes, this tendency to portray regional and social accents was always there. And then, of course, with kitchen sink, the so-called kitchen sink tradition, which was first a stage theater style, but then it included films, which was a specific way of realistically portraying the world. They became so popular again, and the Angry Young Man, etc., etc. Well, that became British cinema. In Italy, things were different. At one point, they were not so different in the sense that we also had neorealismo, which of course valued the language varieties. In a way, what I've always found fascinating is that because in Italy, dubbed productions always had such an importance, I've always found fascinating how the language, let's say, the language of neorealism, never really caught on dubbed dialogue. Dubbed dialogue was always using, I say standard Italian, but it's not even standard Italian. It was an abstract Italian right from the start. And accents and dialects were absolutely not there. Maybe for some very, very small characters now and then, but they were not there until at least the 1970s for main characters, for key characters. So in a way, dubbed dialogue has always been impermeable to what was happening even at the time of neorealism, what was happening in original Italian productions. And accents and dialects were always used in dubbed dialogue, only in comedic situations. So dialects were very much linked to comedy in Italy. Some scholars think because of the commedia dell'arte and that tradition. To tell you the truth, I wouldn't know. I don't know. I don't know if it's that, because after all, it's quite natural to link regional traits to stereotyping and then to laugh at stereotypes. It's quite natural. There is no need to go back to commedia dell'arte, I think. But anyway, obviously it is a theory, and it may be a good one. I don't know. So to answer your question briefly, yes, it's not something which is done today. It's always in the British tradition, let's say, it's always been there, and in Italy it's been there sometimes.
So well, from this point, since we have talked about these linguistic informations, let's say, these nuances that pass through the screen during vision of a particular content, what I would like to ask to all the guests, and this also works as a question for the audience, for the Q&A that will follow this. If you have noticed a change, let's say, in the experience of watching movies and TV series after studying sociolinguistic topics and language varieties. If you, I don't know, rewatching perhaps something you watched in the past, you now can tell, oh, there is this thing that I didn't actually catch in the last time. I don't know if perhaps Professor Ranzato, if you want to continue first.
Well, I can just say that yes, absolutely. For me, it's always, for example, it's always incredible for me to watch films that I've watched dubbed for the first time, and to see how, and I'm not happy to say this and to see how I prefer them dubbed if I first saw them dubbed. This is something which I don't like at all. For example, I must say that there is a film that I don't know why I adore, and I watch and watch all over again. Don't ask me why. It's Apollo 13. I don't know why. I love that film. But for me, it's not Apollo 13. For me, it's Apollo 13. And I love those emphatic voices. And each time I try to watch it in American in that case. And well, I just don't like it. I just like it that way. I prefer it. Yes. To answer your question, yes, it has changed my experience. Studying in-depth language varieties has changed my experience, but I don't know, the reception and appreciation of an audiovisual product unfortunately does not depend on my knowledge, on my improved knowledge. I don't know why. That's it.
What about the others? And like Gaia, what about you?
Yeah, I think I noticed a change in the sense that maybe while studying English, it was interesting to hear maybe accent that I could not understand clearly, and maybe trying to catch what accent, what dialect that was. While now, I'm asking myself different questions, like, for example, why is that character speaking like that? I mean, is it just something that is linked to a quest for realism, so that has to do with time and space and the setting of the product, or is the author trying to hint to something else? And so being aware of how many assumptions I can make on characters just from the way they speak is really interesting. And also to see also how me as an Italian, how differently maybe I perceive accents from native speakers, for example. Maybe there are British or American accents that I find extremely fascinating. And then maybe later on I found out that they are linked to stigmatized, or I don't know, specific social classes that are not so, let's say, maybe fascinating in the original version or for the native speakers. So it's interesting to see how me as a second language speaker really perceive the non-standardness of characters.
Yeah, the different perspective.
Yeah.
Luca?
As for me, studying language varieties has totally deformed my experience of watching TV and cinema, because I spent so many times, so many minutes trying and guess where the actors are from, or the characters, and which is good and bad. Good because I have fun, bad because at times I miss entire beats of plot and I have to go back because I was focusing on how they were speaking instead of what they were speaking about. And this actually happens not only with television and cinema, but I do that even in real life with people, with English speakers who speak to me or not to me, and I only focus on their pronunciation.
And what about you, Michela?
Yeah, I agree with what Luca said about experiencing films and TV series from a different perspective after studying linguistic varieties. And for example, last month I was rewatching, I know it's a teenage TV show, but Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I discovered one character for I think it's Drusilla. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names, but Spike's girl. And she talks with a Cockney accent, and this makes the character completely different from the Italian version. I loved it. I loved her. It became my favorite character because of the linguistic variety she was using, or just how she spoke. And connected to what Professor Ranzato said, I experienced, I had an opposite experience when watching Empire. That is a TV series whose main characters, well, almost everyone has African-American origins, and everyone employs Black English. And I tried to watch one episode in Italian, and it was terrible. It seemed a soap opera like Il Segreto. It was completely different in the Italian version, whereas in the original one we have these nuances, this rhythm that in the Italian version is lost.
Well, I would like right now to open the first Q&A and also comments session. So please, if you have anything to say, anything to ask, raise your hand through the option of Zoom, and I will let you obviously speak. I'm not going to keep you muted so you can't say anything. And in the meanwhile, I would just like to say that sometimes, as far as these topics, no, that was me. Oh, here we are. We have Lucio Pellegrino, if my eyes come through me.
Yeah.
There we are.
Yeah, hi to everyone. I would like to ask Luca or any one of you, if you would like to contribute to his answer, a question, because you mentioned this stereotype depiction of the characters in the movie Zootopia or Zootropolis in the Italian version. And you mentioned a lack of attention in depicting stereotypically those characters when the movie wants to teach children or everyone that differences are not to be pointed out negatively, let's say so. But I'm inclined to believe that in the process of creation of a movie or of media, there is certainly a team of specialists who will decide what is doable and what's not, maybe from a sociological perspective or perhaps even from a marketing perspective, because they're trying to sell a product. So I would like to ask if you think that this is just a matter of a lack of attention, or if this were perhaps intentional, and if so, why do you think that there is this intention to make, I don't want to say to make fun, no, to make it like the stereotype is something to be considered funny and to be laughed at or something like that? I would like to hear your opinion on it.
I don't know if it is a lack of attention, indeed. Probably, and yes, you're right, there is a team, and I'm sure they discuss these issues before opting for different strategies. And I don't know, I think that they just put all the considerations on a balance, and they decided that that humorous effect was more important. And well, maybe they did consider that the linguistic stereotyping could be I don't want to say moral, but well, anyway, not not happy as a decision, but I don't know. I mean, I guess they just did a list of pros and cons, and they decided, okay, this is fun, let's just do it. This is what I think. I don't know.
Thanks.
Anyone, if anybody else has something to say, please always find out. Raise your hand. Here's another one. Oh, Paolo.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I was wondering whether Michela could elaborate a little bit on How to Get Away with Murder and its Italian version, as I guess I'm not the only fan of the TV series. And I've only watched it in English, so I don't know much about the Italian version except for the title and for controversies that aren't actually to do with language. Since there are indeed a few characters speaking African-American vernacular English in the series, do you happen to know how it was rendered? I guess that standard Italian was employed for them since they are very minor characters, but I wanted to ask you if you could tell me something more about it. Otherwise, I will check.
Okay, sure. I saw it a few episodes in Italian, but I noticed that there is a neutralization. And also, the text, we could call it, or just the language is more polite, also more regular on the morphological level. But I think that this decision might be actually connected with what you just said. I think you were referring to the fact that when it was broadcasted on Rai 2 or Rai 3, I think, some scenes about the sexual relationship between Connor and Oliver were omitted. And I think this may be connected. So this neutralization, making everything more polite, clearer. And because on the contrary, there are other cases in which Black English is translated with a colloquial lexicalization or with a dirtier, we could say, or just with more swearings or insults, whereas in the Italian version, I didn't notice these things. And there is one episode, I think, in the fourth series that Annalise is with her mother, and she actually is one of the few characters who employ Black English in the series. And well, as I said, she talks in standard Italian, but there is a scene in which she sings an old song that is typical from it's typical for African American community. I think it's called Shoe Turkey or something similar. And here there is the complete distance between the language, because of course she sings in American English with a Black English accent, and the neutral language she employs in the Italian version. So I felt a little bit bewildered or confused because there is a complete difference.
Thank you very much.
I see there are no other hands, although I've seen a raised tail. I don't know if Professor Ranzato's cat has a question. Seeing the tail raised before. No. Well, I wanted just to say that For me, sometimes I say that the only reason I study languages is so that I can understand more jokes. And this is indeed true, because sometimes when it's comedy, it's extremely different to make the same joke in different languages. And so generally what happens is that you have simply different jokes. And so some films actually feel very differently when you look at the comedy side of them. Well, I'm thinking about Mel Brooks, Frankenstein Jr. or Robin Hood, Men in Tights, in which there is actually a joke about Robin Hood being the first time in which Robin Hood actually speaks British English. So for me, that's a very important thing about watching films, watching movies in their original language. So being able to catch these nuances. Well, since I see no other hands, I would actually, well, it was not true. Silvia, please.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I have a question for whoever would like to answer it. I'm under the impression that Italian varieties are very different than English ones, in the sense that Italian ones are more regional based, while English ones are based on race and ethnicity and class a little bit more, even in an intersectional way, in a sense. So I was wondering, do you find that to be true? And I think that it's also a big component in the difficulty we could have in translating this kind of varieties. And do you have any insight on how we could reduce the gap in a sense?
I don't know if anyone wants to answer.
Maybe I can say something. Well, Sylvia, I don't know if what you say is true. I would say that that there is always a component of regionality and social implications in language varieties, both in Italy and in Britain. And no, I think that the link between dialect and stereotype and nuances and network of connections that one makes when one hears that particular accent are always linked, are always particularly embedded in the culture from which you are. And of course, this is one of the most difficult things in translation. This is one of the most difficult hurdles in translations, because there is nothing so embedded as a lingua cultural variety, so to speak. And so to disentangle all those connections and all that landscape, and to transfer it to another culture is one of the biggest problems, of course, and there is practically no solution, only strategies to, as you say, mitigate the gap. And obviously every text has its own rationale, and so one has to adopt, I think, a different strategy depending on the type of text. I am a big fan of invented varieties when you find a variety, as most of the students who follow my courses know. So, and when there is, of course, the possibility. When I say invented varieties, I say creating a non-standard variety in the target language, which is not so closely linked to a particular region, so that you get that sense of otherness and of something different from you, for something alien, but you cannot really pinpoint it, and you cannot really link it to any given and variety, and so it is not. It is a very difficult operation, and it only succeeded in I would say few cases. But when it does, the result is really very interesting, and maybe in literature you can do more about this, but there are examples of films and TV series which also opted for interesting solution in this sense.
Thank you.
So that's fine.
Where is it? Well, okay, so there will be time for more questions later, but now I would like actually to keep up with a question of mine to Professor Ranzato, because you were talking about the courses that you teach, and it is important, I mean, to mention that you are the founder and coordinator of a project which is called Dialects in Audiovisuals. Could you describe the project to us?
Yes. Well, Dialects in Audiovisuals is first of all a website that I have set up and that I am fueling with the work from all of you. As you know, you've all contributed to this at some time or other, and it's well, I like to describe it as a repository, an archive of files, each devoted to a film or TV series, which features a key character, not necessarily the protagonist, but a key character who speaks with a regional variety of English, or British English. For the moment, we're concentrated on British English. We have, of course, other accents, other varieties, Australian, American, etc., but always in films which feature British characters as well. And so these files describe, well, the plot, and they give technical details, but the main thing is that they say they detect the function that that particular accent has in that particular audiovisual text, as well as, of course, detecting which varieties we are talking about. So, for example, we have a Cockney, and the fact that that character speaks in a Cockney dialect, I mean, that Cockney dialect is there for a particular reason, and that reason being, etc., etc. It may be to make a social commentary, or it may be to make you laugh, or to describe realistically a particular place, or to portray somebody, for example, somebody who really existed as a historical figure, political figure, etc., etc. So this is Dialects in Audiovisual. And as I said, thank you all for contributing to this. It's growing, and it's getting richer and richer. I have hundreds of files which we still have to upload, and Luca knows something about this now. And so that's it. This is Dialects in Audiovisual.
And Luca, you are co-coordinator of the project. And so, as Professor Ranzato said, the students have contributed to the making schedule of the films, you know, all the details. And you were helping us. I remember sending you the emails. Oh my God, Luca, is this all right? Is this okay? And I remember actually having a good discussion about the representation of the Northern accent in The Last Samurai, I think. The character with I couldn't understand if it was a Northern English accent or a straight Scottish.
It's a pity that Mary had to leave now, because as you know, she's a Northerner. Mary Warder, who was with us, who's been with us until now, is from the north of England. So she could have made a comment on that. Sorry, sorry to interrupt.
We'll never know.
We'll never know.
But how was the experience, Luca, of also helping students, you know, during this during the lectures, during the course?
It was awesome. As you know, as I said before, I really enjoy detecting accents in films and TV series. So all the files that I received in that period, I spent hours then looking at the links that you put on the files, and so I enjoyed all of those conversations that I had with all of you. And as for what you said, I think, yes, we were talking about The Last Samurai, and I think we were discussing on Billy Connolly's accent. So yeah, and I told you he's famous for his thick Scottish accent. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, it's an amazing project. I totally enjoy contributing to it.
And now to Gaia and Michela, because as all the students did, you contributed to the project, because I can see your pictures and your bios in the people page. And I wanted to ask, for example, I had much fun analyzing, in particular, a couple of contents of TV series. One being Lucifer, and the other one being Blackadder, which, by the way, in my opinion, is one of the best comedy series ever made. What about you? What about you, Michela?
Yes, I chose Lucifer because, well, up until the last season, I loved it. And I loved how Tom Ellis represented the main character, Lucifer. But when I watched the first episodes, I wondered why he is the only character who speaks with an RP and some features of Cockney, because the TV series is set in Los Angeles. All the main characters employ American English, and also Lucifer's brother, Amenadiel, speaks in Black English. So I found an interview in which Tom Ellis explained the reason. And by the way, he's from Cardiff, so he usually speaks with a Welsh accent, but not here, not in the TV series. He changed it because he said that he tried to employ American English, but to say it in a more in a polite way, let's say that he didn't like it. But then he said that he tried with a British accent because he felt that Lucifer was one of those maybe posh characters that we can find in Oscar Wilde or Noel Coward's plays. So it's like a mix. He says the love child between Noel Coward and Mick Jagger. And Mick Jagger, because the character has also a rock and roll soul. And I think that this choice works perfectly, because if you saw Lucifer, you all know that he's a little bit posh with an impeccable clothing choice, but he also leads a reckless life. He is the owner of a club, but let's say in general, reckless life. So also this rock and roll soul. And so it brilliantly reflects the distinctive traits of this character. We could call it, so to mention the categories we used to describe the function of the linguistic variety, an idiolect, but also British versus American, because he is the otherness. He is the character that differentiates from the others, and so this is why the use of this RP accent works. But also one could say villain, the British employed for villains, but I don't agree with this, because at the end of the day, if you saw the TV series, you know that he's not the villain. The others are.
I remember the internal conflict of putting that tag on Lucifer, because I was saying, well, Lucifer is obviously the archetypical villain. I mean, it's
the devil. Yeah.
So it's literally the devil, but he's not the villain of the series. So there is definitely something going on there. I mean, there is this contradiction. So I was really thought in putting that particular tag. And Gaia, what about you? You remember any, let's say, particular case?
Yes, but I would like to say first that it was really interesting to practically analyze something we were theoretically studying, but I have to say that it was quite challenging, because the website has already so many films and series featured. So I really had to think out of the box to avoid the obvious choices and first things coming into mind. So it was really interesting, because it forced me to really pay attention to anything I was listening, even putting TV on and leaving it in the background. But as soon as a non-standard variety appeared, I was like, okay, what is that? What is these characters? What is the season? What is the episode? Because it was really challenging, because every film, every series you had in mind, you went to the website, checked, and it was already there. So it was like, no, God. But it was really interesting, because it really forced me to really pay attention to anything I was looking at. And particular cases, I remember analyzing both Vampire Diaries and Skins. And it was interesting, because I watched them years back. I can't even remember when. But when rewatching them for this project, I noticed that once I was sitting there trying to understand what function that linguistic behavior was performing, I really changed my mind on some of the characters, or maybe some of the plot turns that in this series. So, for example, to say that when I watched Vampire Diaries, I almost didn't realize that the villain was speaking a British variety while all the others are Americans. So I was like, how I did not notice this before. So it really changed the way I approached also things I already knew and I thought I understood very well the very first time, and I had to admit it was really not the case in the end. So it was really interesting and also gave me a new point of view, both on things I already knew, but also gave me the chance to find out new things I did not even heard of. So it was really, really interesting. I loved doing the films and the series. Yeah.
Well, the question that I wanted to ask right now actually has already been answered, since we have already pointed out what we think about the importance of noticing these nuances. But what I would like also to ask you is if you would, let's say, recommend to other people, to those who do not study languages, how we did and how we're doing, let's say, would you suggest you paying more attention, to be more aware, to grasp these informations, to understand, let's say, not only the audiovisual context, but also the social context in which these linguistic features, as Michela pointed out at the beginning of this event, are very, very, very important. I would like to start with Michela, actually. What do you think about this?
Yes, I think that it is really important because, well, it is no secret that TV, especially recently, has become the major source of entertainment, but also of information. And several studies prove that the way a linguistic variety is represented on screen can influence viewers' perception of them. So, for example, let's take the African American speech community. Compared to the past, there has been a change. We were used to see Black English speakers relegated to the stereotypical roles of the servant, the housekeeper, the drunk, the poor. Whereas now, think about Black Panther, Luke Cage, Empire, or Shonda Rhimes TV show. We have pop stars, doctors, attorneys, superheroes, and I think that this can positively influence viewers because also on the linguistic level, these most of them reproduce the linguistic variety in a faithful way. So they do justice to the speech community, to this language, also in a social context.
Gaia?
I would suggest paying attention to non-standard varieties in English movies and series, but I would also suggest to pay attention to dubbed versions. I mean that there are some, I think, as Professor Ranzato was mentioning before, there are very interesting examples of how even dubbed versions are able to convey that sense of otherness and of something strange that is present in the original. And so these are the cases I would suggest to watch the dubbed version, and then when there is the chance to switch and rewatch it in the original version. Because, for example, I remember analyzing also Snatch for my dissertation. That is a brilliant example. I think it must have been a nightmare for the translator. I don't know. Marco Mete was probably still has nightmares of Brad Pitt speaking like that, because it was terrible. But the dubbed version is actually so good. It was capable to convey that exact effect I think it has on English speakers. So yeah, I would suggest paying attention to non-standardness in English audiovisual text, but also to pay close attention when watching dubbed films and series, because sometimes it is possible, even if it is in standard Italian, to catch a glimpse of something that maybe might be going on in the original version, if the adapter was very good at it. And that's the case where I suggest switching language to the original version and see the differences and the similarities between the two.
And Luca, what do you think about this kind of suggestions to, let's say, the general public? I don't know.
Yes, of course, I do. I do think that it is very important, that it is very useful to try and grasp the difference between different language varieties in an audiovisual text. I think this is useful not only for language students, but also for people who studies other subjects like literature or cultural studies in general, but also to audience, because recognizing a language variety means understanding more about the text, because language is very often a tool for creators to say something more without saying it overtly. And so, yeah, I think that recognizing language varieties means understanding a text more thoroughly.
Professor Ranzato, obviously this has been explained a lot by
Yes, I would say, I would add that it is particularly important for all those who study English, especially, and all those who have to do with Italian, because not in all countries, and not in all cultures, and not in all languages, the relationship between standard and non-standard is the same. There are languages in which there are very few dialects. There is this richness is really something of Italy and something of well, Great Britain in general, of the United Kingdom in general. There are so many language varieties, so many dialects in both these realities, but it's not the same in other realities. So in this particular case, in our particular case of language of English learners, it is very important. I remember a comment of someone commenting on Mike Lee's Secrets and Lies, that some of you students know, because it's one of the films that I often show during my courses, and this British person was saying, how can anybody outside England, how can they understand all the nuances of these characterizations, of the fact that there is this working class lady, and then there's this brother who is working class but has climbed up the social ladder a little bit more than her, and then there is this more upper class characters, but this is all, as I said, very nuanced, and it's not so apparent if you don't know the varieties. Obviously, in films there are visual cues, so something about the way people are dressed and about the way people set up their houses, how the furniture and the paintings and the ornaments and the things they have on their walls, on their tables. Of course, that these help, but there's nothing which helps so much as understanding the language varieties and the very subtle differences between these and that character. So yes, it is very important, but as I said, not so important, for example, if you're studying German, I suppose, or even French, Of course, there is argot, but it's not. There are not so many differences as
there are cultural differences,
yes.
Depending.
Yes.
also from the language.
Yes.
Well, now I would like to stay with Professor Ranzato because I would like to pass to the next topic, which is actually a forthcoming publication,
Yes.
in which also we will be able to read something by Luca, if I'm not mistaken. And well, can you tell us something about this?
Yes, well, the book had its origin from the Them and Us conference that some of you attended and that was already mentioned. And it's about its dialects in fictional dialect. So not only in audiovisuals, there are some very good contributions, actually wonderful contributions on accents and dialects in plays, and for example in Elizabethan theatre, and in literature, novels, contemporary novels, and not so contemporary novels, but there is also, of course, a section on audiovisuals. We have a contribution on Game of Thrones. We have Luca's contribution. I comment on Shakespearean adaptations, so on characters speaking with an accent in Shakespearean films. Films based on Shakespeare's plays. We know that in Shakespeare's plays, we have very few characters speaking dialect, speaking a non-standard variety. It's not something so common in Shakespeare. Then again, it's nothing common in Shakespeare, in the written Shakespeare that has been handed on to us, that we obviously read the plays. But we don't know, and actually we may guess that probably actors spoke with non-standard characters, and that it simply wasn't indicated in the plays, in the written plays, as today. You don't often have this kind of information in the screenplay. So when you make a film, you have to remember that if you read the screenplay for that film, very rarely you will find in brackets, he speaks Cockney, she speaks with a Yorkshire accent, etc., etc. This is very, very rare. So we can guess that even that the same holds true for Shakespeare, that, okay, you don't have that in brackets, that character speaks a non-standard accent, but maybe he or she did speak with a non-standard accent. Okay, having said that, so the characters in Shakespeare is one thing, but another thing is the adaptations. You know that Shakespearean films is a branch now of film studies, a branch of its own, because there are so many adaptations from Shakespeare, and there are so many interesting rewritings of Shakespearean plays on film, that you really have a branch of its own. And so in this kind of Shakespearean films, obviously you have a plethora of characters who do speak with an accent. And so in my chapter, I explore why they speak with an accent, and that's it.
Luca, can you disclose something about your article in the publication?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So my forthcoming article is entitled "Why is he making the funny noise? The RP speaker as an outcast." And as the title says, it is a study on the loss of prestige of received pronunciation in today's television. And I take as a case study a TV series, Dairy Girls, that you can watch on Netflix, and I urge you to do that. In this sitcom, almost all the characters speak with a very thick Northern Irish accent, except one. This boy who speaks with RP or at least a form of it, and he's constantly mocked for speaking RP. So he's the other, he's the different, and I chose to speak about this topic because this goes. This clashes completely with the traditional definition of received pronunciation as a regionless accent, because in this case the RP speaker is the person with an accent, while usually it is seen as, you know, the perfect speaker. So this is very funny, and please watch the series.
Yeah. He's the non-standard one in that case. Exactly. He's the outcast, as you said. Yeah.
Yes.
And Michela, instead, I know that in the next future we will attend a particular event. I don't know if you want to say something about it.
Yes, I had the opportunity to translate some Asian films from English to Italian for the Asian Film Festival, which will be held here in Rome in the next weeks. And it was a great opportunity because audiovisual translation is one of my main great research interests. And so I translated the subtitles, and there are really, really interesting films. And after this internship, I think I will find some master, because I want to continue studying audiovisual translation, and you never stop learning. So
definitely true. And Gaia, you are one of those that never stops learning. You're still studying, and
Yes, I do.
precise audiovisual translation.
Yes, I'm attending a master in audiovisual translation for dubbing and subtitling at UNIT here in Rome, and it is very interesting. After having spent so many years analyzing already made translations and what has been already been dubbed, it is very interesting to be in the other side and learn what are the challenges of such a complex job, which is incredible. And so yeah, I'm really loving this experience because we are having the chance to learn from I think the very best. They are all very skilled teachers that are giving us so much. But it's really interesting to see how it is certainly much easier to judge what is already been proposed. Well, it's much more difficult to find solutions and be faithful to the original, having to consider many variables within audiovisual translation. So it's really interesting, and I suggest Michela to keep going because she would love that.
So as I did before, I will invite anybody who wants to again ask questions, make comments, anything, raise your hand and you'll be able to speak. In the meantime, I was thinking, Gaia, while you were speaking, I remember when that episode of Game of Thrones, here, and spoiler alert, so mute me if you don't want to hear this. The episode when it was revealed the origins of the name Hodor. I remember there was plenty of memes in the internet with like the Italian agency of dubbing with all committing suicide over that episode, because how the hell am I going to translate all that stuff? So obviously there are so many things that one should know to make a a good job, let's say. And sometimes I would say that it is actually, let's say, impossible to make a well, I would say literal translation, but obviously it's not the right term. I mean, sometimes you have to make changes that that one might feel, let's say, it's a person that is not inside that discipline might feel are too much, but they are actually necessary to convey the right message. Well, I didn't see hands actually. Well, I lost. Okay. Well, in that case, what I can do is actually thank everybody, the guests. Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you for having explained your interest to all the little details of your work. It was extremely appreciated and extremely interesting. I would also like to thank the audience for attending this meeting that would like to be the first of a series of conversations on different topics. And Transitions, a postgraduate journal, revolves around humanities, and hopefully we will have all the meetings with oh, I see now there is something. Can I ask Luca to repeat the title of the last series he mentioned?
Okay, I wrote it on the chat. It's There We Go.
Oh, there we go. Yes. So yes, as I was saying that I really hope there will be many other conversation on many other different topics. And in the end, what I like also to remind is that late in July, we will have the issue of transition coming out. This time, the topic will be imaging communities. I will be co-editor of the issue with Andrea Lupi, which is part of the editorial team. And so I would really ask you to please keep following the activities of the journal. You can find us on the social networks, on Facebook. I think there is the link in the chat for the WordPress site. So you can go there and you will find every other information needed to follow us everywhere else. Also, if you want to read, for example, the manifesto, and if you want to download the launch issue, which was edited by Paolo Dindino-Sante, which is right now one of the 2 editors-in-chief of our journal, and we owe so much to him for his experience in Memoria di Shakespeare. He has taught us so much about this kind of work. So again, thank you to everybody, and I really hope to see you again for another event like this.